I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. So today is December 7th, and we're December 7th? Today's December 7th. It's my birthday. It's Pearl Harbor Day. I was a joke because December 8th, which is Rohatsu in Japanese, is the date in the Buddhist calendar that we celebrate the Buddha's enlightenment. So it's kind of a big deal. So on this date, everywhere, all across the world, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Buddhists that are sitting together to celebrate this one day. It's kind of like our Christmas day in some ways. And in a lot of ways, it's regarded as and traditionally in a monastery, it's the sesshin that you put all of you put your most spiritual energy you can possibly muster into practicing for that. I'm not sure how effective that is. It's a lovely thing to do. Sometimes you sit up through the night. But what I always like to do on Rohatsu is to reflect a little bit on the Buddha and what actually happened there and what it is that we do. So the question I used to ask myself is why, it used to puzzle me, why is the Buddha smiling? Why does the Buddha always smile? So you look at this Buddha, it's a cement copy of an amazing Buddha from Mongolia, and you look at it and you say, well, is that a smile? And then you realize, no, it's a smile. It's like, and he's sitting in deep samadhi and he's smiling. You always see the Buddha smiling. And you see the Buddha the Buddha came into this world as a prince. He described himself as there's this lovely little passage in the sutras where he says, I'm so delicate. He says, I was so delicate. I had a pink palace for the winter and a blue palace for the summer. And I only wore the finest silks from Varanasi. And I only ate white rice and everything was of the finest. And his father had, because it's prophecy at the time he was born, that this infant would grow up either to be the greatest king in the world at the time or become the greatest spiritual teacher the world had ever known. The father said, well, I really, really don't want him kind of wandering off and becoming some yellow-robed sannyasi, somebody who's given themselves to God. We've got a kingdom to run here, and he has all the traits for that. And so he created this false, so the legend goes, he created this false situation where even as his father, he would dye his beard black all the time, so all the white hairs would be covered on it. That in the palaces, in the realm in which the prince moved, that there would be no indication of the realities of human existence, either sickness, old age, or death, of loss. That the prince he grew up never knowing these things, and then one day he went for this chariot ride out to the city with his charioteer. His name was Chana. I don't know if it means being or not, but it's kind of being. He in the course of this chariot ride, he came across first a very sick man, like very sick, maybe plague or cholera or something like that, and then an old person. And then a person who had died. And I often ask people, I'm going to ask you right now, have you ever been with somebody who was recently dead? Like recently dead. I remember for me, it was, I thought, of course, I was 23 years old the first time I went to India. And I realized that was the first time I'd actually seen, not in a coffin, but seen somebody dead. And in very short order, in India, I came upon, first I was traveling in Old Delhi, and a very different place at the time. It was kind of cold. And it was just very true. Now you go to India, everybody's wearing clothes, Levi's or whatever, but at the time, men very strictly wore white pajamas and a turban. So it was a sea of white pajamas. Women wore saris or shalwar kameez, and every once in a while you see somebody wearing trousers and a shirt, and everybody looking, he must be from away somewhere, but there was this big long line of beggars, and there was this. I'm walking down, and I'd already learned to look out of the corner of my eye so that I didn't attract too much attention. But and I'm walking along, and okay, that guy doesn't have a leg, and yes, he has leprosy, and he has. But woman, what is she begging for? Like she's sitting there with this little bundle in front of her, and then I looked, and it's a dead infant, and she's begging for money to for the funeral for this child, and it kind of brought me up short. And then within what would it be? I left Delhi probably within 2 or 3 days after that. I was in Varanasi, which is where the Buddha preached his first sermon, not far from Bodh Gaya, where he realized himself. And I'd go down to the burning ghats and watch the funerals, like I'm watching people being cremated. And then it's not everybody that gets cremated. In the Hindu pantheon, in the Hindu religion, if you're die in Varanasi and cremated and have your ashes scattered on the river, you're forever released from the wheel of karma, from the wheel of birth and death. But sadhus, there are certain categories that aren't cremated. So sadhus are not cremated. Children are cremated. Animals are not created, and lepers are not cremated. And so it was. They're just thrown in the river. And I remember it's also the myth at the time was that among travelers was that I can't believe how gullible I was, but that this river was immaculate. That it was, I mean, it looked disgusting, and there was all this industrial waste up river coming into it, but that there was. I had this guy tell me it was a bacteriophage. I think was that there are bacteria in the river that ate all the other bacteria, so that this was actually while it looked very unhealthy, it's very healthy and clean. So everybody else is bathing in the river and so I did also, and then I'm gonna go for a swim. So I dove under the water, and I came up. I was swimming out on the boat, and I came up face to face with a corpse that had been in the river, like just surfaced and like that, and it shocked me. Like I was really taken aback. I just got out of the water immediately and left. It really shocked me. And then not long after that, within 2 weeks after that, I was walking in the train station in Calcutta. I was walking in Howard train station in Calcutta. I walked in, and it's just so tight in Calcutta. When I walk in the rain, the umbrellas reach to here. Like there's a sea of umbrellas, and I'm like this much above the umbrellas, and so I can kind of usually see what was going on because the Bengali people are quite slight and smaller, and then all of a sudden, like I can see there's like a node in the crowd or something. It's dispersing, and I'm walking along, and all of a sudden the crowd just splits like this and meets on the other side, and everybody except Hoban, and I'm right there, and there's this guy has died on the platform, and there is, and he's just voided himself out of all of his orifices, and there is a big ball of flies at his anus, and his mouth is full of flies, and his whole face is covered with flies, and it was a very, at the time it was probably 120 degrees or something, and humid, and it was a very disturbing thing for me. So I say that because I can imagine the Buddha's shock at what he actually encountered. And he encountered the reality of human existence, which is that sickness, old age, and death come for us all. And loss is an ever-present reality of human life. You're losing, whatever you think you had, whatever you think you're holding on to, is literally disappearing instant by instant by instant by instant by instant by instant. They say, firewood does not turn into ash. Firewood does not turn into ash. There's only in this mirror of this, the mind mirror of the present instant, there's only room for one face in the mirror. Okay, so it's when I say that, I mean that I'm not an elderly man or a young dying person. You are not middle-aged people. you are not middle-aged people, yeah. And so it's not like you are this young person who has grown to a certain age and now you're a middle-aged person. It's not like that. It's not like that. Firewood does not turn into ash. There's never been an instant of time for there to be anything that is either firewood or ash. So I can see why the Buddha would be aware of loss at the same time. And that somebody who had all of his gifts and had life laid out for him in this way, that in the face of what are called the five messengers, sickness, old age, and death, and loss, and karma. There's in the Pali Canon, there's a sutra where this guy finds himself in hell up before Buddhist hell, which is, then the Theravadan tradition. You think Christian hell is terrifying. You ought to see the Buddhist hell. It's one of the most terrifying of the hell realms for me is called the beloved. And it's a flaming pillar of brass, of molten brass, that manifests as your beloved. And you're drawn inexorably to just run to embrace your beloved. And you embrace this and you're immolated, you're burned. And just over and over and over and over and over again. And so anyway, this guy, he's finds himself in hell answering to Yama, the Lord of Death, for what happened. He said, I don't know how I ended up here. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know this was going to happen. And now what? I'm going to hell? He said, and Yama says, you didn't know this was going to happen. He said, you didn't get the messengers. He said, I sent you 4 messengers. And he said, no, I didn't get. He said, well, have you never seen an old man? We said, yeah, I've seen an old. He said, that was the first messenger. Have you ever seen a man who was really sick with the plague or colic? That was the second messenger, and so on and so forth. So let's turn the Buddha around. And for most of us, you might say, well, what would that do? It might draw you to see if you could put it out of your mind with frivolity, enough drugs and sex and wild times and skiing or whatever that you could just kind of camouflage it all. But I think probably for most people, when you really engage reality, those are what are called the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. If you really and truly engage them on a deep existential level, it's hard not to practice or not to realize the reality of practice at that point in time. There was a king that the Buddha, at one time, Bimbisara, the king, had asked the Buddha to share his kingdom with him when he met him, which is, like, who is this monk that he's so gentle and wise? And anyway, the Buddha was sitting around one day having his noontime meal, and Bimbisara came up to him and the Buddha said, where are you coming from? He says, I'm coming from, I'm busy with the activities of being a king, and they are many. And the Buddha said, what were you doing? And he said, well, I usually start the day with, I go and consort with my brides in my harem and see how things are going there. And sometimes they go better for me than not. So I was in my harem, and then I had to consult with my ministers to see how the treasury was doing and whether we needed to raise taxes or not. And then I had to consult with my war ministers to see how we were supposed to get a new tranche of war elephants in and make sure the weapons were all ready. And then I can't remember what the fourth was. And the Buddha said to me, he said, you're very busy, king. He said, what if, and you're obviously doing a good job taking care of the kingdom. What if you were to find somebody, a trusted messenger was to come to you from the north and say that there's a mountain larger than Mount Everest that's sliding over the ground, coming directly for your kingdom. It's going to wipe everything in its path. As it travels, it just eliminates everything down to mineral soil. And a similar mountain from the east, a similar mountain from the west, a similar mountain from the south. They're all sliding over the ground, coming right towards your kingdom. taking everything before them. They're going to crush everything in its path. They're going to meet right here where you're standing. He said, what would you do? He said, what would you do? Would your conscience be able to help you? Could you distract yourself with your harem? Would that ease your mind? That put your mind at ease? He said, no. And he said, well, what about knowing your vast wealth? Would that put your mind at ease? No, of course not. Well, what about your war chariot? Says, can you conceive of a weapon that you could manufacture that would address this problem? He said, no, of course not. And he said, so what would you do? And he said, well, I've been with you long enough. I practice the Dharma. He said, what else could I do in those circumstances? And he said, even so, that is the reality of your existence right now. So these 4 mountains are the 4 messengers that we're talking about. These 4 thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. You can't carry anything out of here. You can't bargain with the Lord of Death. You can't, at the end of the day, you die alone and you die a pauper. And the question is, how are you going to live your life? Because sometimes there's a notion that you're, hoping he's got half a foot in the grave, right? People where they're maybe a week from dying, they're very, very sick. But the reality is, you're 100% alive until you die. And how do you prepare for death? How do you prepare for death? Well, getting a will, that's a good idea. Having a representation agreement done up, that's a good idea. But how do you prepare for death? Certainly, wise ones have said, well, it's a good idea to feel the reality of death, to be acquainted with it, to organize your affairs, to do different things. But how do you prepare for death? At that moment, so we practice the Dharma. So the Buddha, it said that that night he formed this vow, this bodhisattva vow, to devote his life to, and that he would in that lifetime see through and put an end to human suffering. See through and put an end to human suffering. And even now when I think about it, it kind of makes me cry. It makes me tear up. That somebody would really, like in that situation, just to having seen the reality of it, it's to actually put your life on the line in that way, knowing what it actually meant to walk away from what his life was and to devote himself to others in that wholehearted, meaningful way. And it said that one account I finally read years later was that what finally sealed it for him was that there was a big party in the palace that night, and as he was heading back to his room, everybody was drunk and they were draped around, in various states of undress and whatever was going on, and he was disgusted by this party that was happening in the graveyard. People kind of partying and dancing in the graveyard while it was going on. So he went back, did not say goodbye to his wife and son. Some versions of the story said he did. And he asked his charioteer to take him to the river. This is in northern India, what's now Nepal, close to Lumbini, very close to Lumbini. And he crossed over the river. He took a sword and he cut off his hair. He cut off his long hair, and he traded robes with a wandering mendicant. And so he took all his princely garments, gave it to this guy, and then the guy quite happily took the princely garments and exchanged for his yellow robe. And he set off. So how would it be for you to all of a sudden take everything you got, make one heap of it, and go downtown and find a homeless person and say, here it is, here's my stack of gold, here's all my clothes, Here's my CDs. Here's the whole mess. I'm going to swap you that. Will you swap me that for what you got on your back? Everything, just giving up everything at that point in time and going off into not having any. It's unbelievable to me. It's unimaginable. And yet, in India at that time, noble after noble after noble after noble walked away from their kingdoms or the palace, whatever it was, and joined um, uh, his monks. And it wasn't like it was a pie in the sky thing. There's a story about one monk who at night it was somebody heard him in this tone of voice, this moaning tone of voice. Oh, happiness, happiness. And he went to the Buddha and he said, this poor guy, he's supposed to be practicing, but he's obviously not practicing. He's just in sorrow for having the decision he's made to come and join the order. And so the Buddha said, oh, really? He said, I know him. And he had this monk brought before him. And he said, is it true that last night somebody heard you moaning happiness, oh, happiness in great distress? He said, no. And the Buddha said, well, do you deny that you said those words? So this way, no, he said, I said those words. He said, he didn't understand. It may have been a moan, but it was a moan of delight. I can't believe that happiness, that there could be so much happiness and joy in living such a simple life as this, in living a life with the Dharma. And that's what I was saying at the time. It's amazing to realize that. Maybe not. Maybe if you're a noble, you think you're going to be killed at any time. But so the Buddha went off, and he was a homeless person. He was like a homeless person in, like it would have been sleeping in the woods in North Vancouver 150 years ago, maybe, when there were still cougars and bears and stuff that, roamed the woods. And because, in India at the time, there's, literally tigers, lions, leopards, wild wolves, wild dogs, wild pigs, elephants, rhinoceroses, all manner of poisonous snakes that lived in the woods. And at that time, the shramanas, the wandering monks, would just live out in the forest. And there's one passage that I probably talked about 2,000 times, but it's so meaningful to me, where the Buddha talks about how he worked with fear and how he met his fear. And he says, he says, it used to be particularly on religious holidays. So these particularly auspicious occasions when I would go out and I'd be sleeping in the jungle, and, your mind is filled with supernatural, and he's going out into the jungle and the moon is full and he's laying down to sleep, eyes wide open, and he hears a crack of a branch in the jungle. And it's like, I know this feeling. I used to be a hunter. I used to in the woods, and you spend a lot of time in the woods. And he'd hear this crack, and he'd think, is it a leopard coming for me? Is it a tiger coming for me? Or is it just a peacock that's broken a branch? And he said, I could feel the fear rise in my body. Now, anybody here not know what he's talking about? Maybe it's not fear. Can you feel the anxiety arise in your body of being put into that situation with somebody or having to do that thing, or whatever? Or can you feel that whatever the emotion is, whatever the klesha is, this afflictive emotion, rise in your body and just overwhelm you? It's easy enough when we're sitting here in the Zen to say yes, 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 yes. But when that fear actually, in the moment when it arises, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And he said, what I did was, he said, that was the start of my training. He said, I said, why am I afraid? What is it that I am so afraid of? And he said, I stopped. Wherever I was doing, if I laid down, I remained laying down. He said, I didn't get up and run for the road. I didn't, he said, if I was laying down, I didn't sit up. If I was sitting up, I didn't lie down. He said, I sat in one place and I experienced the fear, felt the fear in the body, felt the fear with the fear, allowed all of the thoughts to wash over me, and I didn't move until the fear passed. So he trained himself in the same way. So many of you have done that with We use this bracelet training that we do. Many of you have done this training of actually being willing to face. You say, well, it's not that emotion. It's actually I'm I have a fear of failure, or I have. I'm talking about my own fears. I have a, a fear of being left all alone. Everybody has that fear, a fear of not being loved. Some people have a fear of living, just a plain out fear of putting yourself forward in life. It's easier not to do anything. It's easier to do nothing because it's scary to actually put yourself out there and present yourself as to do something or whatever it might be. I used to find it was very scary giving a Dharma talk. There's all these people in the audience, and I'm talking about something, with it. Am I touching their hearts? Is this going to help anybody in any way? What is so we all have these fears. And to be willing, all people often come to me, what about anger? How do I work with anger? And it's the same no matter what it is. Put yourself into the situation of anger, relive that experience and stay with the emotion. Feel it in the body, let it run through the body until it dissipates over and over and over again until you're able to be okay with whatever that emotion is. So he went and he spent 6 years training. He trained for 6 years. He trained with the finest teachers. This was at a time when it was like a hotbed of spiritual renaissance in India at the time. Mahavir Thakur, who was the sage who founded the Jain religion in India, was a contemporary of the Buddha, and he studied with two teachers in particular for a very long time, and both of them offered to said, "Please come and we'll teach the Sangha jointly." In terms of that, in terms of what we're doing, you've seen as I see, which is what transmission at its best means when somebody is transmitted as a teacher. It means that you and your teacher see the same. But he realized that in all cases, he realized the boundless mind. He realized the formless. He realized the ability to he could enter samadhi at will. But what he had not realized was he had never stepped outside the glass elevator. He had never stepped outside the glass jail cell. He always come back to inside and outside. He would in Zazen, he could experience that, but he always came back to inside and outside. I'm in here. The world is out there. I'm in here experiencing that out there. Or I'm around here. It's epiphenomenon. My mind is in this general area, but this is me, and that's that outside there. And he realized that this is not ultimately satisfying my quest. This ultimately is not going to help. It does not put an end to human suffering. And so finally, he took up what was the predominant Hindu practice with sadhus and ascetics at the time, still is among many in India. Where you travel, you'll see people doing, like there's one guy once, I'm trying to remember, he held his hand in a particular way like this for like 10 years. People will these unimaginable ascetic practices where they torment their body in some way, causing themselves pain, just that if I take on enough pain or enough of this practice, that the body will become so diminished that it'll allow this spark of the divine to fly free and I'll be released. And so he took on these ascetic practices. He went out and he lived, he would only eat these tiny little amounts of food, that his hair all fell out, became matted and it fell out. He said that when he coughed, his stomach would touch his backbone. His skin turned black, his nails fell out, his teeth were, I don't know, and actually that's not, I don't know if his teeth fell out or not. The one lovely story, the cowherds used to poke the sticks in his ears to try to torment him. He'd sit outside in, the 120-degree heat in India and just sit and sit zazen like that. And the only grace he got, he has that bump on his head because the curly bits on it aren't curls. There's this legend that he was sitting zazen one time out in the heat, and the snails, all of the snails en masse, crawled up over his body and climbed onto his head to form a turban to protect him from the sun. And so finally, there was Siddhartha and 5 friends. They were his Dharma's friends, that had all been doing ascetic practices together, and they were practicing together. They set up in a cave on Dongashwari Mountain, which is maybe a couple kilometers from Bodh Gaya, and it makes it sound like it's this great mountain. It's a rocky bluff that's maybe 500 feet high, but there is a nice cave that is still there, and they practice there. And then he had this waking dream, and a dream realization about when he was a young boy in Nepal, and his father was doing the spring plowing ceremony, and he was sitting under a rose apple tree, and he spontaneously went into meditation, and he was just sitting in peace, in ease and joy under this tree, and completely lucid, completely engaged, without thought. And he realized, could that be the path? He said, could it be that that's the path, that I've been wasting my time on these things? And then, like he said, it is the path. And he left. He said to his friends, he said, I'm leaving. He said, this is not the path. I know what the path is, I'm taking the other path. So he stumbled down off Dongashwari Mountain, and he waded across the Naranjara River, which, quite frankly, would be about that deep at that time of the year. It's not a monumental feat. And he collapsed on the other side of the river, and this little girl, Sujata, gave him this bowl of rice milk. And he came, and he regained his strength. She fed him over the course of a couple of days until he was just practicing sitting in this state of ease, calm, abiding, and allowing himself to go deeper and deeper into samadhi. And then finally, a buffalo herd came along and gave him this big pile of kucha grass that he put on this stone to sit on. And he sat down and he renewed this vow. He renewed the vow that only this time it wasn't that he would end this lifetime. He said, I will not move from this place. I will not move from this place until I've seen through, and seen past, and how to release once and for all the reality of human suffering. And he sat down and he made this last stand. And it talks about how he descended through the jhanas, and he had these different realizations, but he just went deeper and deeper and deeper. Jhanas are levels of meditative absorption in the Theravadan tradition that I don't teach, because it does not correspond with my own meditations, samadhi practice. Others, it does for others, but he went deeper and deeper until finally, and this is something that is very real, all of a sudden Mara appeared. So Mara isn't like some demon devil that exists anywhere outside the mind, but Mara appeared and challenged him. Mara usually appears at the gate when you're getting close. And I challenged him, and he said, tell you what, I've got look at all my daughters here. I've got all these seductive daughters I brought with me, and they can be all yours. They're yours for your asking. Palaces beyond a measure, whatever kind of wealth you want, I offer it all to you. You've worked long and hard, and I just want to reward you for what you've done. Just abandon your quest. And Buddha just turned his back on him. And then so Mara said, okay. And he then went and he marshaled all his armies. So maybe you know some of them from sitting sesshin: fear, frustration, doubt that you're able to do the practice, doubt that the teacher knows what he's talking about, doubt that the teaching is there, doubt that somebody tells you that you're not a fully enlightened being, that there's work to be done here. All the doubt and the fear and the self-judgment and the loathing and the imposter syndrome and everything just manifests as an emotional storm, the way he talks about it. He marshaled all of these demons and energies against the Buddha. And the Buddha just sat. And then finally he came to him And he appeared before him very quietly, and he said, "You arrogant pup, you arrogant human being, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are that you are going to be the one to finally see an end to the suffering that eon by eon, kalpa by kalpa, has defined the reality of existence for all beings? You think you're going to be the one to do that?" He said, "I don't think so." He said, "All of my armies, all of my daughters, they'll bear witness for me that you're not the one. And who will bear witness for you?" The Buddha's sitting there all alone, and he put his hand down and he touched the earth, and the earth shook. And he said, "The earth itself is my witness." And he sat, and Mara finally left. And the one thing I want to say is, everybody here, if you haven't, you are going to butt up against Mara in the fiercest way in your own lifetime in practicing. The deeper you go in practice, the closer you get to, or the deeper you go, the closer you get to realizing the mind ground of all existence, the more your mind starts to kick up a storm. It's just so afraid of what's actually going on there. So the Buddha sat, and he sat through the night, which is why it's common in sesshin to sit the last night, sit all the way through the night without sleeping. And he sat through the night, and then on the dawn of that day, he, seeing Venus appear in the sky, seeing the morning star in the sky, he looked up and he had this realization: that's me. That's me shining in the sky. That's me. I'm the sky, and that's me shining in the sky. And his realization, the way it's sometimes put in the koans, is that he said, "I and all beings are hereby liberated for all time. I and all beings are hereby liberated." And every time somebody else realizes the truth for themselves, again, I and all beings are hereby liberated. And then began his journey teaching. So we say that in the Theravadan teachings, the teachings of the elder, they talk about nirvana. People have this idea of nirvana. Oh, it's this blissful state of, and these words get much drawn. But nirvana in Sanskrit meant a candle that's gone out, or a fire that's gone out. And so, and the fire is the fire of life. There was no longer anyone to suffer. There was no longer a being to suffer, but he still had a body. He still had a body, and this body, he continued to teach. He said that at Bodh Gaya, he, having had this realization, he spent, I forget how many weeks it is, just moving from place to place around the Mahabodhi Temple, what's now the Mahabodhi Temple, exploring this psychedelic amazement, which was his own mind from moment to moment, until he finally, and he realized, this is unteachable. How can you possibly teach? How do you put the taste of chocolate in your mouth and somebody else's mouth? How do you do, you can't do that. And then this Deva came down from the heavens and said, well, what if there was one person who could, they were almost on the verge of realizing it for themselves. Would you do it then? And he realized, well, it is possible. It's possible. So he set out to teach. And he, on his way, walking from Bodh Gaya to Varanasi, I don't know what it would be, 100 miles, something like that, 3-4 days walk, 4 days walk maybe. The first person he met, his very first student, he met somebody on the road, and he was walking along on the road, and this person came up to him, and he looked unusual. Like it said that his skin became glowing. He manifested this golden skin. And this person came up to him and said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm awake." So that's a good Zen answer. I'm awake. And the guy was a seeker himself. He was a Shramana, and he was on his way to seek a teacher. He did ultimately study with the Buddha, and he looked at him and he said, "Well, maybe, brother, maybe it'll go well for you." And he walked away from it. And so it was a gift, an incredible gift to Shakyamuni Buddha, because he realized that what that indeed it wasn't going to be easy to teach people reality, and that he was going to somehow have to break down what he had to offer to a level that people could understand or grok to enter the practice. So it, I wasn't there, but he walked on to Varanasi, and then he, in his first Dharma talk, he gave what is the traditional Buddhist teachings. You know, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Paths, the Seven Factors of Enlightenment, the 12 co-conditioned factors of enlightenment, and teachings of karma. And he laid all of this out as a system. And to the five, his brother monks, they had originally been working together as doing ascetic practices. And initially, they wouldn't even talk to him at all. But then they also came forward that this is very unusual. Look at Siddhartha. He's looking a little bit different these days. But so that was the first day. The second day is the talk that I really want you to remember. So the talk that he gave on the second day was very, very short. The actual sutra is like a page long, but essentially he said, "I am not this. This is not me. This does not belong to me." Nothing you can say. You say, "Well, what about my body? I am not this. This is not me. What about my mind? I am not this. This is not me." So then you break it down and say, "Oh, well, then the five skandhas, the five heaps that, go to make up, in Buddhist psychology, go to make up a human being. The body, perception, sensation, volitional actions, and consciousness. What about consciousness? I am not this. This is not me." Whatever your practice is, incorporate that in a sitting period. Whatever it is, at least once a day. I and all beings are hereby illuminated. This little gentle watchman, that I hope you have some experience setting up. It's not some good idea I had to just maybe make it a little easier for you to do your zazen. This little watchman is I. This little watchman is I. So is this I. But this little watchman is I, and I really, really, really encourage you to explore that I, become immersed in that I. Where does that I dwell? Is that I in your body? Is that I outside your body? Is that I always there? Is that I only sometimes there? Is I a thing? Where does I reside? Investigate that I as thoroughly as you can. Is I inside or outside? I am not this. This is not me. This is not mine.